If a conflict began today, General, is the Army Reserve component manned, trained, and equipped appropriately to be successful?
I would say it would depend on the type of organization within the Guard and the Reserve, sir. We meet our directed readiness tables requirements in terms of the active component, the Guard and the Reserve, in terms of what are required inside those immediate forces that are needed inside of 10 days, 30 days, and 45 days. Once you get beyond that, then it is not as pretty as you would see. This last year, we did have to bring down in the op-tempo accounts for the Guard and Reserve. We typically like to keep them at 85% of their training requirements. We had to bring that down a little bit this year because of the top line that we were at. So there is concern. Now, as a result of that, the Secretary and the Chief and all of us are taking a look at what is the right balance between the active Guard and Reserve and what mission sets should be in those. And there's an active look at all of that.
Well, don't you wish you didn't have to begin your answer with "it depends"? I wish you didn't have to begin your answer with "depends." The Navy spends billions of dollars each year to operate and maintain its combat surface ships. Those surface ships are vital to combat, deterrence, defense of the homeland. Yet year after year, we hear about significant challenges to the readiness of our Navy's surface fleet. How's the Navy changing and modernizing in this regard, and also in the way they attack ship maintenance to get problems under control?
Two general areas here, sir. Thanks for that question. One was addressed by General Mahoney. One, locking down that planning in advance of that availability is key. That requires the funding, and the contract closed about 4 months before we start the availability, which allows the contractor to order those long lead parts and develop those teams, in particular for amphibs, steam maintainers, and diesel maintainers, which are a shrinking pool in our nation. So lock down that project ahead of time and understand the condition of the ship, which means you have to do inspections and really understand vice opening things and inspecting them during the avail.
What kind of flexibilities do you need to be more ready that you could use? And this could be very broad or very specific. And then the good news, very quickly, we've had a turnaround in recruiting. I think it has a lot to do with some of the comments I made in my opening statement, where the last 4 years our military was not focused on lethality and war fighting and why young men and women join to fight and defend their country. It was focused on other stuff, irrelevant stuff, and it hurt recruiting. Why do you think, where are you on recruiting, and why do you think there's been such a dramatic turnaround? So those are the questions I'd like each of you to answer. We'll start in the lineup here. General Mingus, if you can hit on all three of those.
Thank you, Chairman. A full year-long continuing resolution impact, yes. To the degree and the severity is unknown, as was kind of talked about earlier, based on the anomalies that come out of this, the puts and takes in the various lines in the budget, what is plussed up and not. We'll have to take a couple of days to kind of fully, if it is actually enacted before the end of the week, the true impact. But new starts, spending limits, spending power and buying power, those are critically the ones that always rise to the top. And we've never had a year-long continuing resolution. This will be the first for the Department of Defense. So a lot to be determined in terms of what those impacts are going to be. Flexibility, sir, you and I talked about this last night. We all submitted a J-book and a budget almost 18 to 20 months before we actually see an enactment in an appropriation. A lot can happen in that 18 to 20 months. Every line of accounting, every piece of equipment, every radio has its own individual line within the J-books that come back in our budget line items on the back end of appropriations. For high-tech things, UAS, counter-UAS, high-tech command and control systems that evolve at a rate faster than our budget cycle, we would like to compress those lines to allow us to move in year of execution those monies to new things that come online in year of execution.
If you can work with us, all the services with regard to language on those kind of flexibilities are really important, I think needed, and something that we could work on to get in the NDAA.
Sir. And I yield my time to the others because I went pretty deep in recruiting.
Just for the
in my-
committee's sake, real quick here, just, I mean, we talked about it, but I just for the, on the record, I think it's important for lessons learned on recruiting.
Who you recruit, where you recruit, how we recruit, more professionalization of our recruiting force, expanding the population, all those things that we've been working for the last 18 to 24 months, we believe are coming to fruition this year. We've seen momentum unlike we have seen in probably a decade. We're at 50% ahead of where we were last year, 73% of missions. So as I said in my opening statement, just over 44,000 of a mission of 61,000. I think as you and I talked last night, we're going to have the opposite problem we did a couple years ago where come this summer, we may have an end strength that's actually bigger than what we have in appropriations for. But
Well, again, maybe we can work on that. Admiral, and again, I'll yield time back. These are important questions, but we'll get through all of them. Go ahead, Admiral.
Sure. Hey, two bit buckets. One, the CR.
Yep.
Major impact on us. We've gotten used to partial CRs. As General Mingus says, this is our first full year CR. So we'll have to figure that out. And we're looking forward to flexibility, anomalies, authorities to address the kind of things that General Mingus talked about. Let me just use one specific example. 2 years ago, probably a little more than 2 years ago, we were thinking about counter-UAS. We weren't thinking about counter-UAS from the perspective that we've grown to appreciate in the Red Sea.
Yeah.
So the ability to turn quickly and use money and have the flexibility to address those things as we're trying to do with the Forward Strike Group, where we're bolting on systems that are more effective for counter-UAS like Coyote and Roadrunner. Those are all appreciated and hard to do in a CR. So I'd give you that piece, that the flexibilities and for us to work through it. There's a merge with the next topic, which is recruiting. We've made some progress in the Navy as the other services have. We have stormed the problem. We understand, and you and I went over, and Ranking Member Hirono and I discussed what we did in the Navy to break down the problem and understand what it takes to make a productive recruiter. So I think there's renewed focus and clarity on that. We've done the things General Mingus has described, where we've spread to zip codes to get every available person into the Navy, and we're ahead of goal. Right now, our projection was 12,000 contracted. We've contracted 14,000. We were supposed to have 12,200 shipped. We've shipped 12,700. So we're ahead of goal. I'm very concerned about the CR and the impact on that machine and slowing it down. So for us, we want to maintain course and speed, accelerate, and bring in all the people we need to close down our gaps at sea. CR makes that a little more challenging.
We talked about anomalies and flexibility in order to move between appropriations or accounts. We also need to be mindful of what the top line is. If there is only so much top line from which to flex or to move, we're going to rob from one account to pay for another. Examples might be inflation that outpaces the plus up, pay raises that were not planned for or budgeted but are must-pay bills. That money will come from somewhere. And non-budgeted contingencies that we pay out of our own primarily O&M accounts will have to be accounted for somewhere in the rules of that continuing resolution. A knock-on effect specific to the Marine Corps is if, and it's already been touched on by Admiral Kilby, if ship maintenance or shipbuilding or procurement or anything that touches amphibious shipping, it will have a knock-on effect to the Marine Corps, as I spoke about with Senator Hirono earlier. As far as flexibility goes, I would reference the Lord Hale study on PPB reform, and I'll just bring up 3 things that come to mind immediately. I think they have 16 recommendations in there, which are all really good. Multi-year availability of one-year accounts so that you are not forced into making bad decisions at the end of the year and buying things that you really don't need, but have a period of availability to where you can make better executive and managerial decisions against that appropriation. Greater transfer authority so that we can move between appropriations or move between sub-activity groups in order to solve a problem early so that we don't have to come to Congress for an above-threshold massive reprogramming late in the year that may be late to need or not solve the problem. And lastly, and I'll let it go, is multi-year colorless appropriations to have flexibility within a portfolio to strengthen where you're weak and move money around to make sure that you can get your objectives attained within an account. So multi-year availability, greater transfer authority, and multi-year colorless appropriation. And we did the last one, and if you think of MRAP and you think of JADO back in the day, that worked pretty well to get things done at an accelerated pace. I'm running on here, but recruiting. For us, three things. We have a brand that we will not back off from. We believe that that brand is attractive. We believe it is a magnet to a wide demographic of young Americans who will prove themselves physically, mentally, and morally qualified. We will not back off of the standard, and counterintuitively, you maintain a standard at a high level, that attracts people who want to perform.
CR, budget flexibilities, and recruiting.
Yes, Chairman, I can go pretty quick. From a CR, it's a huge challenge. It's very, very inefficient. It does impact us, especially because we are the smallest force with the smallest budget. So any churn in our budget is a huge hit to us. As far as what we would ask for flexibilities, I agree with the rest of the staff, new starts. We are seeing an enormous amount of threats emerging every single year, and it is very hard to get after those threats when you have to wait 2 to 4 years to get the budget to get after those threats. So anything you can do, budget flexibility for New Start Authority. PE consolidation, the ability to move money between programs would be hugely beneficial. And then the multi-year procurement, multi-year execution authority that General Mahoney talked about. As far as recruiting and retention, we've actually got a much easier problem because we have a much smaller force. But we are seeing two volunteers for every recruit that we take into the United States Space Force. So we're able to be very, very, very selective for high quality. 15%, almost nearly 15% of our recruits have some college level of education, to include all the way up to masters and PhDs. We are recruiting objectives were met the last 4 years in a row, 104% for our enlisted, 101% for our officers, and we're looking at continuing growth in the future, and our retention rate has been in excess of 98%.
I recognize the need to build a larger fleet. However, I have significant concerns about the Navy's basically dismal track record of maintaining ships and submarines in the current fleet. We consistently see delays, increased costs, ships without adequate crew, a lack of spare parts, and other issues. General Mahoney, it seems clear that maintaining amphibious ships is not a top Navy priority, and I do understand Ms. Morrow said that the Navy and the Marines need to come to an agreement on how these amphibious ships will be maintained. But how do delays in the Marine Corps' amphibious ship maintenance impact your ability to train and deploy Marines, and how would you be better supported by, and how could you be better supported by the Navy?
Senator, thank you for the question. We are very concerned with the condition of the amphibious fleet and the availability of the amphibious fleet. This morning, I check it every morning, there were 13 of 32 amphibious ships available. In order to get to a goal of 3.0 MEUs, that is heel-to-toe MEUs, combined with their amphibious shipping off the East Coast, one off the East Coast, one off the West Coast, and one in the FDNF, that number is not going to do it. I look at it in short, medium, and kind of longer term, perhaps, solution sets, and we're working closely with the Navy. Of course, we have to get to terms of reference. We can't classify a ship that hasn't sailed in 10 years and probably never will sail as an available ship of any class, much less an amphib. But what I would say is we need to resource amphibious shipping to make it to their service lives and not decommission them early. Secondly, we have to get ahead of the maintenance curve. That means years ahead of port loading, of availability sequences, getting the avails in on time, making sure that we have the parts and the maintenance crews to maintain them and get them out of the avails on time. More toward the midterm, we need to make every ship count with service life extensions and midlife upgrades.
I want to ask you one question about counter-UAS readiness, because the Army is the DoD's executive agent. Talk to me about how you're ensuring coordination between the services in developing a joint counter small UAS doctrine and solutions to addressing the UAS threat.
Thank you, sir. As the executive agent, you're well aware of the Joint Counter UAS Office, or the JCO, that is run by but it is a joint entity.
Yeah.
And everybody that's sitting at this table, there's probably very few weeks that don't go by where we don't come together to talk about this problem set, whether it's in the venue of what Replicator 2.0 is going to bring across 100-plus sites across the country, to now what is going to be part of the Golden Dome. But this conversation on the counter UAS side is absolutely a joint problem. Yes, we have an Army officer in charge of it, but he is in a joint billet, and he is speaking for and trying to solve this problem for the joint force. And I collectively think this team is trying to get after that.
What would be our greatest capability gap, and what should Congress do to address that?
I'll start first. Again, munitions. Long-range munitions, preferred munitions are an area where we need to increase our productivity as a nation. And then from just a general sense, our capabilities are pretty good with the exception of that munitions quantity, but our capacity is a problem. So getting those ships and funding available out on time will result in a greater capability overall.
Senator, thanks for the question. To your point, in the next 2 years, the greatest challenge for us is going to be regaining the sustainment edge in our current fleet. The lead time required for parts and supply within that time frame would require an infusion to help us with our aircraft availability, our mission capable rates, and training our flying force to be ready within that window. In addition, some flexibility on new opportunities with technology in terms of asymmetric capabilities that would enable us to actually inculcate our force design, which calls for both high-end exquisite capability paired with low-end, low cost per effect, massive capability that can augment the air component commanders who are in the field.